Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure. Welcome back to the program, JP Wiggins, who's co-founder and vice president of logistics at 3G TMS. And today we're going to talk about blockchain and its potential role in transportation management. Blockchain is one of the most talked about technologies in the industry today. It's also one of the least understood, with a lot of questions and uncertainty surrounding it. Does blockchain have a role to play in transportation management? What are the biggest, hurdles and challenges that the industry needs to overcome to, make blockchain and transportation a reality? And, how can it potentially improve the status quo? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have JP back in the program to kind of share his insights and perspective on this topic. So, JP, welcome to the program.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Glad to be back here. It's always a pleasure.
So, JP, as I just mentioned, over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of, hype and discussion about blockchain and its potential role in supply chain management. I mean, where are we today in the hype cycle from your perspective? I mean, is the perception and understanding of blockchain changing, and particularly in transportation?
I think the hype cycle has gone from, there was the hype cycle to now we're into this whole mode of healthy skepticism. And that's where, you're really going to fine tune your ideas and where things really are going to come out. I mean, before, when we were in the hype cycle, there was crazy ideas of people talking about what they were going to do with blockchain. And, you heard some pilot programs kicking off, and you could just tell it made absolutely no sense what they were trying to accomplish, where they could simply email each other back and forth and have a secure network, as opposed to setting up this entire blockchain between two different individuals here. So we're in a different world now. And, what we've talked about and what we wrote on the article is just something it's an idea. Maybe here's something that might actually find use for the technology, because I think if I had to look at myself personally, that's the skepticism I've been in, which is, blockchain is a technology in search of a problem. Obviously it was created and built around the Bitcoin and what's been done for Bitcoin and the secure transaction there. But if we ignore what's going on in Bitcoin and really look to see what the technology can maybe do, well, there is some other options that potentially could apply to us directly here in transportation.
I love that, because I think it is, I think I agree with you. I think we moved away from this, hype of, I wrote a post a year or two ago where, hype can cure anything. You saw articles about how blockchain can cure cancer, and how blockchain is going to, solve world hunger and so forth. And I think for a lot of, people saw these headlines and kind of dismissed it, or kind of said, this is getting way out of, proportion. But I think you're right. I think a lot of that has blown away right now. And now people are starting to really look at it with a little bit more, seriousness, if you will, still with that healthy dose of skepticism and with their questions or whatever. But now they're kind of starting to peel back the onion a little bit and say, okay, let's really try to understand this a little bit and try to, see where, if anywhere, does this technology make sense, particularly in transportation. So I know you've given some thought to this. I know you've had some discussions. I mean, so let's peel back that onion a little bit. Let's say, I mean, how can blockchain improve transportation management? I mean, what are some of the problems that perhaps it can help solve, or benefits that it can provide to shippers and logistics service providers?
I guess one of the examples I like to talk about is, we're a tier 1 TMS. I mean, it's not a secret. So when we move a shipment today, in today's digital economy, what you're doing digitally with the freight is actually more important than what you're doing operationally sometimes. So we just did a quick study on some of our average clients. Our average clients touch an individual shipment electronically 35 times. From the time the order is created to the time it's delivered, there's 35 different hits. And more, it's actually even skyrocketed. Some of our hiring clients have 100. So there's 100 electrical touches of that shipment from the time it's created to the time it's actually delivered and paid. And, through the, let's call it through the life cycle. So what are you going to do with those 100 different touches? Well, a lot of our API type of connectivities where, all right, well, you're going to get ordered updates. You're going to get maybe updates from the vendor. You're going to get updates from the warehouse managers. You're going to get updates from the trucking companies. You're going to get status updates. So there's so many different data points that have to happen to, to handle that, let's call it the e-commerce error or Amazon error or whatever it is. So people need to know what's really happening with their freight while it's in transit. Well, one of the biggest gaps that still exist right now is let's call it the mom and pop carrier, the brokerage carriers. and it's a dominated mode that we use here in North America. There's over 500,000 of these carriers, 500,000 carriers with less than 6 truckloads or less, and still it's kind of a black hole when you tender freight on brokerage. It's hit or miss whether you're going to know, where's that freight at, when's it going to deliver, is it delivering on time. So while for other modes and other methods of transportation, I got a lot of different things in play here. I got many ways to track that freight, but you turn it over to a brokerage right now, it's tough. You don't really know. You're using that brokerage carrier. Where's it at? And that's kind of what we're thinking the need is there actually, it does seem to make sense that a blockchain solution here to help solve that visibility for the brokerage carriers themselves.
That's an interesting statistics. I mean, when you think about that whole life cycle of a shipment in order, right? It originates in an order, and then, to the, the end state of actually being delivered, up to 100, touch points. I mean, I think that's a pretty interesting statistic there. But it's believable. I mean, when you think about all the different steps that takes place, even when you get into the realm of then optimizing it and then track and tracing, and then exceptions happen, of course. So you have to then take some corrective action there, and then there's proof of delivery and receipt and freight order and payment and so forth. That really goes through many different steps here. I mean, you touched upon, I think, an area that's getting a lot of attention today, which is these owner operators or small carriers that play a big role in the transportation management in the industry today, and being able to plug into be able to share information and data from those carriers back into our systems. I mean, there's a lot going on right now with ELD and so forth. I mean, do you see kind of the interplay within ELD, mandate, blockchain, TMS? That's kind of the realm where the opportunities might exist?
I think so. I mean, well, definitely with ELD, and we've kind of solved visibility, or almost solved, or really have relatively solved visibility for like the contract carrier or the larger carrier. There's some great, I call them third-party tracking telemetric solutions out there that, they do a great job of hooking up to the carrier's ELD or hooking up to the carrier's API systems themselves, and they can track where the truck is. So in the food industry, it's been absolutely dominating. We've got some great clients that use some great third parties there. I don't want to plug names, but most of them are your sponsors. So, but they know. So we know contract carriers. It seems like it's really been solved. But for like the 3G brokerage customers that even use these third-party telemetrics, you turn a freight over to a mom and pop carrier from a load board, and they're getting about 25, maybe 30% tracking. And that's because a lot of times a brokerage carriers, it's a mom and pop. There is no IT department. Their ELD may actually be a smart app that they've downloaded on their phone, or it's something that's been built into the cab. There's just physically no way to connect into all the ELD, and they have no IT department. So, so what are we down to right now? We're trying to figure out, if you can get the driver to, track the driver. If you have the driver's cell phone number, you can say, hey, can I please track you? Yes or no. And that cell phone type of tracking is actually more or less going away. But we also even found, even when it was around, like I said, it was a 25% acceptance ratio to get that driver to agree to being tracked. There's some people were better at it than others, but we never saw anywhere that was over 30% tracking for that cell phone type of tracking. And that's, what they're saying is Verizon is not going to renew the contract with Location Smart and stuff like that. So there's, that's, you can still track, but you need to have an application on the cell phone itself. You actually need a smart app. And then you can track via an app for that. But then you get into, well, we just talked about it. There's 500,000 of these carriers out there. There's literally dozens and dozens of choices for them to use here. How do you bring them all together? How do you herd those cats in at one? And that's where I think eventually, if we do kind of get this herded around, that a blockchain would make sense to solve this type of problem. That you could set up these different individual networks that the carriers have, bring the data in, and describe what is a blockchain. It allows a business network to share shared information in a secured format to the different parties. And I think there's definitely a possibility for using it there.
Yeah, no, interesting. I mean, I think we which leads to my next question. We kind of touched upon it a little bit. I mean, blockchain, obviously, it's not a silver bullet solution, by any means, and nor does it operate in a vacuum. I mean, what other technologies or capabilities are required to, fully realize these opportunities? Obviously, I think, from a shipper standpoint or a 3PL, a brokerage a player standpoint. I mean, a TMS is a core part of this as well, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, what do I want? My clients are 3PLs and shippers, and what do they want me, my TMS, to do? Well, they want it to be able to tender. They want to be able to see acceptance of tender. They want to know when it's going to get picked up. They want to know where it's at in transit. They want to know if there's going to be exceptions during the process. And then, we want some type of proof of delivery, or know when it's being delivered, or and the TMS has the workflow built in it. I mean, we've got the workflow. We know ETAs. We know if we're out of ETAs. We know we'll develop delivery windows so that we can develop, performance-based scorecarding and all this others. But more importantly, we've got the notification process and the workflow to automate it. Not only, like I said, there's 100 different touch points that can happen for a shipment, just a single shipment. You want those hundreds to happen automatically so that you don't have to have a human interact with them. And that's what the tier 1 TMS is, so that you don't have to interact with those shipments unless it, gets to be some kind of massive exceptions. I mean, even what we would say is tier 1 exceptions. You want tier 1 exceptions to be handled by the workflow intelligence automatically. You don't want to have a user involved for even tier 1, because it seems like everything's exception these days. So, but if we've got the cell phone tracking, I mean, we've got the pieces of the puzzle here. I mean, even the load board carriers. Okay, everyone's got a cell phone. I mean, everyone should have a smartphone at this point. If not, that's something that maybe we got to push forward on. But having a smartphone, having some apps that they can run with, but it's then just trying to bring it all together so that we could, we want to be able to automatically tender to load board carriers. We want to automatically be able to get status updates from load board carriers. Even imaging, document retrieval, proof delivery, things like that. That's things that we just want to have automatically. And it's, and we're still in a place where, 80-90% of freight is tendered via email right now. So,
right. So what do you see, to get there? I mean, but what do you see as the biggest hurdles or challenges that the industry has to overcome in order to make, transportation, blockchain and transportation a reality?
Well, I think, it's been a tough one. The big challenge is how we're going to get to critical mass. We've got 500,000 carriers here. How would we get 500,000 carriers on the same network? And that's really what needs to happen. How would we get them on that same network? And I thought of, well, maybe this could actually be an initiative by a government agency potentially. Could a government say, hey, there's enough. We're talking a significant slice of the GDP here that gets moved on this 500,000 group. If setting up a network that allows us to bring that group of carriers into the fold that's required, I think there's significant benefit to the U.S. economy, or the economy of North America. That's one. Another is there is some different smaller company apps that are getting out there. They're getting some good penetrations with the drivers themselves. Maybe consolidate 3 or 4 of those different companies together to one, and then you can get critical mass. And then you can start coming up with programs to incentivize a carrier, saying, well, you have to load my app to run your freight. And you know what? I'll give you $50 to run the app this time. It's $50. If you don't want it, then it's, just get paid $50 less. But it's click yes now for $50. And then instantly cash them, like give them the API pay slip for $50, make them, get on that network that first time. And then maybe it's an extra $10 for every load that they handle beyond that. So, but it's just building that critical mass, getting a high percent of those truckload carriers to be able to on that. And then once you get a high enough percent, if you're using carriers, then you can use carriers that you've onboarded, and you can just you can start, doing that whole network of just using the onboarded carriers that you can track. And then when you're doing your load boards and carrier assignments, you set up a carrier and their insurance, like the way you onboard carriers. You set them up as another part of onboarding is well, they're able to track. And maybe you've got 3 or 4 different methods to track them, but you're still able to track them. And so that box gets checked, so they're allowed to be selected when you're moving across the load boards.
No, some great ideas there. And, another thing that I'm seeing is, there needs to be kind of, ultimately for any kind of mass adoption, you also need some kind of standards, in place. And certainly there's the Blockchain and Transport Alliance that's doing some work in that area. I mean, do you see that as well as another
I think
that's required, standards?
I think everything that you're going to have to do here is going to have to go around BITA. So, it's looking to build something around BITA, whether it's, maybe it's a government thing doing BITA, or it's a private initiative that's using BITA, or some of the different initiatives that are going on. I don't see it being a single private for-profit company that just does this as a network. I don't know if someone could reach scale. That was the thing that I'm struggling with is, can one company reach enough scale to reach critical mass here? And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that one. Maybe
Yes,
so.
it could be, it's the type of thing where if you do have some standards, and particularly standards around interoperability, right? So maybe it isn't one single private entity, for profit thing, but maybe you do have some, a handful that do reach some sort of critical mass on their own, but then the ability to them for all these things to these separate networks to interoperate and talk to one another in a common format might be another approach.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's different things that need to happen ultimately, for this to gain traction. But I think there's certainly a lot of momentum and demand in the industry, particularly from a visibility standpoint. Things like on time in full and so forth, where the demand for this visibility and data, so that companies, shippers, and 3PLs alike can take proactive action and make smarter decisions faster, I think is going to drive whatever direction this is going to go.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of also curious what if Uber for Freight is able to make some transactions here, able to make some leverage, shall we say, because there are, if you're going to haul a load for Uber, you are going to be tracked. I mean, and Uber is going to give you that Uber, and they're going to have that type of information there. So I've always debated if that's going to work. Now, Uber is a shipper solution. It's not, they're not into the world of rebrokering to someone else that's doing brokering. So, but maybe if they change that methodology a little bit, and maybe brokers could use Uber. I don't know. I mean, right now that's not on their plate. They're not in the whole mode of broker to rebroker, so you get the double brokerage gone down. But for the freight that they're moving, they are tracking because they've got the carrier to use their app itself. So
right.
Tracking with an app. And that's really what it comes down to. That's the magic puzzle. How do you get an app? How do you get a trucker to download your app and use it?
Right. And then if you talk to the truckers, I mean, they don't want to have to download, 20 different apps on their
horrible.
phones.
Yeah, go grab a driver. And it's funny to do this, and I've done this a few times. They go look at the ones you have on there now, and they'll have a dozen of them, and they're waiting to be updated, and they're in the field, and they don't know what they're doing. And remember, they've just picked up a load. They've just picked up a load, and right. Some people say they've got the greatest app in the world, and some don't, and they're getting confused, and they've got just too many different choices. So it's somehow to bring it all together.
Right. No, I agree. Well, JP, we're running, short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what advice, would you get to shippers and logistics service providers then, with regards to blockchains? I mean, what actions, if any, should they take today to make sure that, they keep pace with whatever developments, take place in the months and years ahead?
Yeah, no, I think this is something that's coming. I mean, we have to solve this for brokerage. This is the pressure has been building. I mean, it hit us, the e-commerce effect and the tracking requirements of the other modes was a tsunami. 24 months ago, it wasn't there. We've had to solve those in the past 24 months. So this is going to get solved in the next 24 months. I can't tell you how it's going to be getting solved, but it will be solved in the next 2 years. So, and I'm really looking forward to that, because that's the type of stuff we love to do as a TMS. Use this data. We want the data. I mean, we want to have electronic methods so that I can set up workflow to automatically process the brokerage alerts to the system, so I don't have to have a person. And in fact, that's one of the biggest challenges brokerage companies have to growth right now. Is the more they grow, well, then the more people they have to cover the loads, because it's still such a manually intensive industry. Well, why is it manually intensive? Well, you're still doing check calls, for gosh sakes. That's one thing you need to get rid of. And you can't get rid of check calls unless you can monitor where your carrier is at every day. So, if we solve this problem, that's good for me, because then I'll sell more TMSs, because then my TMSs can help brokerage actually scale. And economies of scale for brokerage is something that really hasn't happened because of the manual requirements of physically tracking brokerage loads. So this is something that once it's solved, though, then we're in a new world order.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of different, brokerage places over the past couple of years, and it's that scalability and growing the business that is top of mind for them in terms of how do they apply technology, to be able to help them, do that, because there's still a lot of manual processing, taking place, out there. So we'll see what blockchain, ultimately ends up in this industry. But I think you're right. Going back to your early comment, we've kind of moved past the hype. We're now into the kind of the healthy skepticism. And I think we're going to probably progress those areas now where, we're going to more clearly identify those opportunities and then start taking some action to apply it apply blockchain where it makes the most sense, and here in transportation.
Yep.
So again, JP, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Oh, love to be here. Thanks.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the 3GTMS website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for JP, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Well, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.